The Manilow Method podcast is a production by Logan Allen and me, Barry Harris. And now, let's start the show.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Manilow Method, the complete guide to the music of Barry Manilow. I'm your host, Logan Allen, alongside my co-host, Mr. Barry Harris. Thanks for joining us on our second episode ever. We just did our first episode, which was covering 1978's smash hit Even Now, so go back, check that one out after you get done watching this. Today, we are going to be covering the 1996 album, The Summer of 78. It was released November 19th, 1996. It was recorded in Nashville. It was Manilow's only Nashville record, and it was released on Arista Records. So, 1996, Barry, you were a kid at the time. Tell me what you remember about this album.
Well, I remember the first time I heard one of the songs from the summer of 78. So they did a special promotion. They made an offer. They were putting the tickets on sale for Manilow's residency at Radio City Music Hall for 1997. And for the special on sale date, if you went and bought tickets that day, they gave you two things. First, they gave you a sampler cassette. It is called A Touch of Summer. Selected songs from the summer of 78. This is very rare. There's only 3 songs on here. It is Bluer Than Blue, I Go Crazy, and We've Got Tonight. So I actually got to hear those first 3 songs before the album came out. The other thing they gave you, in addition to the cassette, they gave you a wristband that lets you get in line and then have a signing with Barry Manilow. He signed autographs, and that's actually the first time I ever got to meet him. And then a couple weeks later, they released the CD Summer of 78, and I went down to Goody's Disc Exchange, which is an independent record store here in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, where I live, and it's still thriving to this day. I remember walking down there and buying the CD, opening the shrink wrap, and putting the CD into the CD player. So it was a really special moment to actually hear this music for the first time. Now, I know, Logan, that you weren't around when this came out, so I'm interested to know, like, what was your, how did this album impact you, or did you remember any particular songs that hit you when you were discovering the music of Barry Manilow?
So obviously I was born after 1996. I was born in 2006, so this album has a solid decade on me age-wise. So while it wasn't necessarily one of the albums I grew up on, I remember the first exposure I had to something remotely related to it was on the Essential Barry Manilow, released in 2005, a greatest hits compilation. At the end of that compilation, they had, the club mix of I'd Really Love to See You Tonight, and I loved that, and I thought that was the song. I thought it was a Manilow song, and I thought it was an upbeat song. So I remember the first time I heard the ballad version of Manilow's, I was kind of put off a little bit, and then I heard the original. I was even more put off. I was like, this is nothing like what I grew up on. But as time went on, I kind of warmed up to it, and through this podcast, diving into this album has been a bigger surprise than I thought it would be. Just that even though it's, kind of on the slower side pace-wise, it's still interesting. It held my interest throughout, and with each listen, I found myself, oh, that song's stuck in my head now, or tomorrow this song's stuck in my head. I think this album was more of a grower for me than I thought it was going to be. So that was kind of my biggest impact with the album, was actually recently. So we're talking about the album. You were around, like you said. Let's talk about how this album was released.
Yeah, so the Summer of 78 was released on compact disc, good old compact disc. In the 1990s, they did not make any vinyl, and I was very disappointed about that. And they got hip, and they started releasing LPs again in the 2010s, and now everything generally has a vinyl issue. But as of now, the Summer of 78 has never been released on vinyl, so compact disc only. And a little technical note, this is actually an HD CD, and so they would make special players where where you could go listen to it and hear 20-bit audio. Now, to this day, I've never found an HD CD player. I don't know anybody who's ever had that, so I'd be curious to hear from any of our viewers if they've actually have an HD CD system. That would be interesting to hear comments on what that is like. And they also released a cassette version. And of course, back in the mid-1990s, the only way to hear music in your car really was to have a cassette. So yeah, we bought a cassette version, and that came out. And the backdrop was interesting when Summer of '78 came out. You have to think about the way the music scene was. You had grunge music, you had hip-hop music, you had country music. And if you're an artist like Barry Manilow that was around for 20 years at that point, you know, the ground shifts underneath you and you need to do something to, you know, convert to the times. Now, of course, there's a bit of a risk there, because if you do something that's contemporary that you think sounds like a great idea at the time, you could look back and it might not sound so great. But remarkably, what Manilow did on this record is that he found a way to create a sound that I would say it's very new age. It's very similar to contemporary Christian music, especially at that time, that was being recorded at Nashville. And so what Manilow did in this particular record is that he found a really unique way to express these songs. He really does not do what you think he's going to do. There's not big, you know, horns and strings and reverb and big key changes. That's actually not on this album, hardly at all. So it's used very sparingly. The sound of this album is very crisp. And so for me, as part of this program, this podcast, getting the chance to come back and revisit this CD and this album, I'm really amazed. It's held up well. It doesn't sound dated. It doesn't sound aged at all. And so I think that's a testament to how well this was produced. So it was done very well. And yeah, like I said, this record was a departure. It's not exactly what you would expect, but it's very, very satisfying.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's interesting that you bring up that contemporary Christian is kind of the sound you would compare this album to, because as I was going through the people who played on the record and looking through some of their other credits, it was a lot of contemporary Christian records that these musicians had played on. So let's do a little segue into that. Let's talk about the people that played on the record. I've got my cheat sheet here, so I don't have to memorize all the names. So we're going to start here. I'm going to list the musicians who played on the majority of the record. We're going to call that like the house band. Okay, so the house band is Jerry McPherson on electric guitar, Biff Watson on acoustic guitar, Tim Akers on the synthesizers, as well as Blair Masters on the synthesizers. Michael Omartian played piano, electric piano, and synth bass, and he was also a producer on this record with Manilow.
Yeah.
That's a big name.
That's a very big name. In fact, so most people like me would recognize Michael Omartian's name because he produced the self-titled album for Christopher Cross, which was a very rare clean sweep at the Grammy Awards. They won for Best New Artist, they won Album of the Year, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, and that really never happens.
Exactly. So Michael Omartian is a big name. Barry was in good hands with his producer friend on this one. A few other house musicians, Jimmy Lee Sloaz on the bass, and John Hammond and Paul Leem played the drums. So that's the house band. There's some specialty musicians and singers that came in certain spots on the record. We're going to talk about them when we get to the songs that they are featured on. So, without further ado, let's jump into the track list, shall we? We're going to start here with the first track on the album, the title track, the only original song on the record, written by Barry Manilow and Bruce Sussman. Track 1 is The Summer of '78. So I have my notes here of all the arrangements, who arranged the songs on the album, and this song was arranged by both Michael Omartian and Barry Manilow. So when I first listened to this track, obviously I knew it was the title track, so my first thought was, is there a song from the summer of '78 called Summer of '78? But then as it went along, he said the lyric, A Summer of Music and Passion, and then I looked at the credits, and of course it's an original track. So I thought that was a clever lyric tie-in. There are some interesting things that I found going on musically in this. The first one that kind of caught my ear, I'll play it here, is the major 3 chord. So basically, you would think it would go there, but it goes here. And that really caught my ear for a second. I was like, oh, are we going to key change? But then he just brings it back down. So it was kind of like, oh, we're teasing a key change. And that happens a few times on the record. They tease a little bit of a key change, but then they bring it back down. So that was the first thing that kind of caught my ear. Is there anything musically that caught your ear in this song?
Well, musically, I absolutely love the chord progression and the piano intro. That's one of Manilow's hallmarks is, and I will talk about this very often on this program. The piano intro may be one of the most important pieces of information, because especially if you're on the radio, when you hear those first few notes, it's a Barry Manilow song. And I think this particular song, Summer of 78, is structured like that. And so it has a very memorable intro that as soon as you start hearing those first few notes, that this is time for the summer of 78. So I definitely concur. I love the music, and I love that chromaticism from the major third that, is not part of the key. And you think you're going to be going somewhere else, but we go right back into the normal key. So I really like that technique a lot.
So something else musically that I noticed, sometimes, obviously we both have listened to this album and, other albums we're going to be covering a lot more than just a couple times. We've been kind of living and breathing these albums. Sometimes I'll throw it on in the background as I'm doing something just to, kind of let osmosis happen and it just sinks in. And sometimes when it's on in the background, I'll hear something that I wouldn't necessarily hear if I was really focused on it. And as the song was going along, one of the outro chord progressions, I found myself singing the melody of Moonlight Serenade over it. The lyric that's like the I bring you and sing you, that there was just a couple of chords where I was like, that melody totally fits over that. And seeing as just, a couple years before he did the Singing with the Big Bands record, I can't help but speculate maybe that influence was still kind of lingering into his writing and his arranging at this time. So that's, again, go listen to it, see if I'm crazy or not. But that's something, just a little tidbit that I thought was really interesting, seeing how really the last big record he did was Singing with the Big Bands.
Wow, that's something interesting. I've never thought of that before. So I guess what I want to think about is, how likely is that to be true? And I think the answer is it's within the realm of possibility that might have been intentional. That's a pretty astute observation there.
Again, I wouldn't have noticed it if I was focusing on the music. It was just playing in the background, and I just found myself kind of humming it. So yeah, I could be going crazy, but we're probably going to go crazy a few times throughout the course of this show. So I have one other note on this song, another speculation. So bear with me here. But we both know that Barry Manilow and Bruce Sussman are the creators of Harmony, the musical. And the final song in Harmony is a song called Stars in the Night. And there is a lyric here in the summer of 78 that says, the nights were always filled with stars. Now, based on a timeline here, this album came out in November of 1996. Harmony first opened less than a year later in October of 97. So, again, a speculation. What are the odds that the two writers of Harmony wrote this song, and maybe they're throwing a little nod to the other work they were constructing at the time? Again, I might be going crazy or digging too far into it, but I thought that was kind of an interesting coincidence.
Yeah, again, that's another fascinating insight that I never thought about. It's probably going to make me now go back to this and listen to this completely different now that you pointed that out. And again,
I'm so sorry.
That's all right, but through the lens of how likely is that, I think it could be well within the realm of possibility. And with regards to the song Summer of 78, the one other note that I had about this was Bruce Sussman's involvement here. Bruce Sussman comes from the world of Broadway, and or you might remember if you've heard Bruce Sussman in an interview, he says this very frequently, that he was dragged kicking and screaming into the world of pop music by Barry Manilow, and the Mandy thing interrupted his desire to be part of the Broadway world, although they finally did realize that with Harmony. One of the things that is interesting is that there is Summer of '78, the song, is an opening song like it would be in a Broadway play. That is so key to any play, that first song that defines what is this play about, and it really does a lot to focus the audience member on the themes that are going to be important. And so Bruce was the perfect person for this assignment, and he painted such a great picture with the lyrics. It feels very personal and really sweet, and I just think Bruce did a fabulous job on this lyric.
I seriously think so too, and that's why I said maybe it is, like you said, in the realm of possibility that this is kind of a nod at Harmony, since they were finally really in deep to a Broadway creation that came from the two of them, because again, we both know how much they both love musical theater. So that's the opening track, and that was a lot of discussion, so I'm assuming this is going to be quite a lengthy episode. Apologize in advance for that. But next we get to the shortest track on the album, and probably the one with the least notes from the two of us. It is Love's Theme. It's an interlude track written by Barry White and performed by the Love Unlimited Orchestra. I've got one thing to say about this. I thought it was interesting. Obviously, it's building into reminiscing, and that's not where I would have expected it to go. If I was like a casual person listening to this, I was hearing this build, I thought it would have built into a ballad, but it goes Friday night. That was kind of a little bit of whiplash for me for a second. I'm interested to know your thoughts on this song's placement on the album.
Yeah, I really love this, and because I did not, in 1996, really know about that song until I heard the Summer of '78, so that made me go out and go look it up. And it's a really great piece, the entire instrumental tune. And the one thing I'll just mention about it for this podcast, for interesting notes, Barry White is one of very few people that have been involved with an instrumental tune and a vocal tune that both made it to #1 with this Love's Theme. They hit #1 with this instrumental. Herb Alpert's the other person who also has that distinction for This Guy's in Love with You. That comes up in the Manilow universe a little bit later, but Herb Alpert sang that, had a #1 hit, and then Rise as an instrumental was a #1 hit. So it's a really nice way to really kick off the '70s era. I think that was the first real serious disco song, proto-disco song that came out in 1973. So it's a great way to kick this CD off.
Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, I think that is making up for the time we spent on the title track. That's a very short song to talk about. Now let's get into the real middle section of this album, Reminiscing. Okay, Reminiscing was written by a man named Graham Goebel, and it was famously performed by the Little River Band. I was just talking with my mother last night. She says this song is in her top 5 favorite songs ever.
Nice, really? That's great.
So, as we know, this was one of the live favorites at the time of this album coming out. I thought it was very interesting, something that people are going to learn about us very fast. We'll see if we can go an episode without mentioning Here at the Mayflower. I thought the rhythm track was a little precursor to what is to come a few years later on Here at the Mayflower. Just kind of some electronic percussion sounds, some nice warm guitar tones. I felt that this was him getting into the electronic instrument realm, but still keeping it sounding like Manilow. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, because one of the notes that I had is that the instrumentation is very crisp. It's very organic. There's not, like I said, there's not a lot of reverb on these tracks, and I think it really places the instruments like they're right in front of you, and I like that, and that's something I really like about this particular song.
Yes, absolutely. And at 56 seconds into the song, we have our first background vocal moment. So we need to take a moment and recognize our background vocalist. There are 4 background vocalists who sang on this song: Bonnie Keene, Marty McCall, Michael Mellett, and Chris Rodriguez. Those are the 4 background vocals you hear singing on Reminiscing, and they sing on some select tracks throughout the rest of the album as well. I talked earlier with the Summer of 78. There is another little key change tease around 1 minute 40 seconds in, where it starts to feel like it's shifting somewhere, just to bring it back down into the verse. And again, it was kind of one of those things where I was like, oh, here we go. Oh no, we're coming back down. So that is interesting. And I think there's a couple other little key change moments that are close to key changes, but not exactly on it. I've got one other note for this, and then we'll go to you. The ending is very bizarre for Barry Manilow, because the song is building, it's got a nice groove to it, and then you think it's going to have this big climax at the end, but it brings it back down, and he's going into like falsetto voice at the end. There's no key change, there's no huge ending, and it's very not normal, as we were saying before, for a Barry Manilow record to not have key changes, to not have big endings. And I was thinking, it brings it back down and then it fades out. Maybe that was to more mimic what was happening on the radio in the summer of 78. Because you listen to songs from the late 70s on the radio, so many fade outs. I hate fade outs. So many fade outs. So many songs that just, they happen and they reach a certain point, and then from there, it just stays there the whole time, and then it fades out. So I think, while this isn't typical of Manilow, I still think it's keeping with the spirit of the summer of 78, which is why I'm going to allow a fade out on this one. I'll let the fade out slide. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, there's not many fade outs on this particular record. This is one of the very few. There's a few, but this is one of the few. And I agree. It's. I think what this is maybe meant to do, this particular song on the album, it's meant to set off the chain of Reminiscing, and I think this is well placed, being the first, or among one of the first songs on the record. And the one thing that I made a note of is that one great thing about this arrangement is that Manilow has found the perfect key for him to sing this in, because if you do listen to the original, it's really high. And so in a million years, I don't know if I would have imagined Manilow picking this up. But really, you gotta step in and do the work and find the right key and figure out what works for you. And I think he found a great key, and so much so that he performed it in the same key when he performed this live.
I haven't seen footage from every single show on the tours that followed this album, but it seems like there's a good chance that pretty much every show that happened on the tour in support of this album had Reminiscing on the set list. It was a staple for the time. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's been performed since the Summer of 78 tour.
Yeah, of all the songs, I believe from the research that we've done, there might be something out there we don't know about, but I only know of one instance where any one of these songs was done after the Reminiscing tour. I'd really love to see it tonight. Was performed at the 2003 Barry Manilow International Fan Club Convention in Florida. That was the last time and only time I've ever seen an appearance of one of these songs.
So that leads us to a good point. If you have seen one of these songs live after 1997 or 1998, we've got social medias and an email in the description. We'll talk about that later, but reach out to us and please tell us, because if these have been played live, we want to know, because that would be pretty dang cool. Okay, let's move on here. I forgot to mention, Reminiscing, track 3, was arranged by Michael Omartian. And something that we're going to find on this album, there are actually more Omartian arrangements than there are Manilow arrangements, which is a little bizarre when you think about the back catalog of Manilow. So just as we go along, keep that in mind. Here we are going on to track 4, I Go Crazy, written and performed by Paul Davis. I'm telling you, this song came on, the first thing I thought of when he said the lyric, "Hello girl, it's been a while," I was like, whoa, this is like I'd Really Love to See You Tonight. Hello girl, it's been a while. Hello, yeah, it's been a while. It's like the same exact lyric.
Interesting.
Again, it means nothing, but that made my head turn. What did he just say? So yeah, that was the first thought that I had there. The first thing that's really notable in this is Manilow hits a very low note in his vocal on this. He hits this low G, and you don't get that very much. I think of Somewhere in the Night when he used to do it live, and he used to take it down low. Nowadays he takes it higher, but now when he used to go lower, he used to go down to this G. But I can't think of many other songs in his catalog that go that low. Can you?
Yeah, I don't. There's not many songs. He really doesn't go into his low register very much. The only thing that I could think of was Jenny, I Need from the Greatest Hits Volume 2.
Oh, yes.
That's the only other one that comes to my mind immediately.
So, yeah, that was something that really caught me off guard. And then this is the first track. It's grown on me since I did my first couple listens through the album. But I remember on my first listen thinking there wasn't much change between like the verse and the chorus. There wasn't much dynamic or instrumental change. Now, he did this one live a couple times on the tour, at least. Again, I haven't seen all the footage. I've just seen the ones that I have. But I would be interested to see in front of me, before the dance remix, which we'll get to, if there were any changes from the record arrangement to the live arrangement, to see if anything was done to kind of make it a little more dramatic, make it real Manilow fashion.
You know what's interesting is that in researching this last evening before working on today's episode, I actually found an old VHS tape, and it had an appearance from the Today Show in the summer of 1997, right before the remix was released to the radio. And I listened to it. It was very interesting. The biggest change is that there was a slight edit to fit the broadcast time, and there was an ending that is not on the record. So that is what was in, at least that was a remix version. Yet you asked about before, previous to the remix. I'm not sure about that, but that's at least with when the remix happened in the summer of 97 after the summer 78 came out in 96.
Yeah, I would just be interested to see, and any other of the songs too, because we know with the whole theme of the Wheel of Barry on that tour where the audience picked the songs with the clicker, I would be interested to know any of the other songs that came up as well, if there was any sort of changes that he made, because I'm a sucker for arrangement changes and little embellishments. So one more thing that I've got on this song, and then we'll let you go with whatever you've got left. The keyboard tone at 2 minutes and 34 seconds in reminded me of Ships from the One Voice album. The doo-doo, that kind of...
the monophonic synthesizer, right.
Yes. So as I was listening, I was like, okay, that is too close to not potentially be a little nod back to one of his late 70s hits.
Yeah, it's hard to say what's a happy accident and what was really intentional. I think I have a feeling that some things are perhaps intentional, and then other things are happy accidents. And that's the fun part. We get to speculate what were happy accidents or coincidences. It's almost like the Dark Side of the Moon pairing up with the Wizard of Oz. That was just coincidental, but other people have conspiracies that it was planned.
Yeah, I don't know if it was planned, but I'd like to think it was, again, just to support my craziness. Okay, so if that's all, let's move on. Here we go. We're on to track 5, which is entitled When I Need You. It was written, let's see if I can read my handwriting here. It was written by Albert Hammond and Carol Bayer Sager, and it was performed by Leo Sayer. And this is interesting because knowing what we know came in the future, he also featured more Albert Hammond selections in future areas. For the first one that comes to mind for me is the greatest songs of the 70s, where he covered It Never Rains in Southern California. So I think this is interesting. Multiple projects where he's going back and revisiting the music of the 70s. He's drawn to the music of Albert Hammond, which almost makes me want to do a little bit of a dive into the work of Albert Hammond and see what other gems are hidden away in his discography.
Yeah, he's a fabulous songwriter, absolutely one of the greats, as well as Carol Bayer Sager, who has done so many legendary songs, too many to name.
So yeah, that was the first thing that caught my eye. Before I even listened to the song, seeing that Albert Hammond was one of the writers on it, I thought that was very interesting. The first thing, again, that kind of turned my head was at 1 minute and 34 seconds in, he says, "Do like I do" in the lyrics. And that took me back to, the Live on Broadway era with "Do Like I Do." Again, that's not anything about the song, but that was just like, I know that. So something I really wanted to point out in this song, there is an acoustic guitar feature, which is not very common in a lot of Manilow's work. So I would be interested to see what made him go with that and why they chose that kind of vibe for that section.
Well, it's funny to pick up on what you were saying earlier about how this may have begat the Mayflower sessions. Actually, funny you mentioned acoustic guitars. There is a very big acoustic guitar feature on the Mayflower when you get to the night when Tito played. So I think that there's absolute validity that might have a through line in developing his production style and bringing a lot of that into what he was working on at the time, which was the Mayflower. But in this particular version of When I Need You, what I notice is that this seems very gospel tinged, and perhaps that could have been the intention that he was playing with in singing this, because obviously you think of this as a love song. Maybe you could think of it as not so much a love song, but maybe more, professing your faith. And it could work if you read it like that. And that actually, to me, if I look at this particular recording through that lens, I think that kind of makes a little bit of sense for me. And so When I Need You is really an interesting song with the background vocalists that appear on this. But I also noticed during the verses that there's some multi-track background vocals that I don't think are the session singers. I think they are Manilow himself doing some harmonizing with himself. Did you notice that on this record?
So I specifically made a note of that for the next track, because there's, according to my notes, no background vocalist sang on the next track, so I know it was Manilow on the next track, 99% sure. Something I wanted to mention is you took the words right out of my mouth. I literally wrote gospel choir sound in my notes, and I put this saying that when Manilow and the backup vocalists are singing different phrases at the same time, to me that gave it a very preachy effect of like having the choir in the back and then the guy out front, preaching. That was the effect that I got there, having both parties singing different phrases. I totally agree with what you said about the gospel sound on this track. Okay, so now, gave a little tease right there. Track 6, The Air That I Breathe. Check this out. Also written by Albert Hammond, along with Mike Hazelwood, and performed by Albert Hammond. Again, I have got to go check out more of the work of Albert Hammond. The first thing that drew my attention in this song was the chord progression in the verse, particularly the first 2 chords, where it's the 1 chord, and then that major 3 chord. I'm telling you, that major 3 chord just is getting my attention all over on this record. So that was the first thing that got me. So I'm interested to know, are there any things about this album from a musical standpoint that drew your attention?
Yeah, I think we were alluding to before we were getting into this song, it's the background vocal arrangement that I really love. And it's so funny you talk about the verse progression. You're not the only one who really dug that, because apparently Radiohead did, and when they were writing the song Creep, it apparently inspired them so much so that after its release they had to actually amend the credits, and the songwriters for The Air That I Breathe are now credited as writers on Creep. There's a little fun fact there. So so you're not the only one that might have really felt like those chords spoke to them. But looking at the Air That I Breathe and listening to that, I think this is maybe one of the most radical changes from the original version. You know, Manilow did a good job in keeping the DNA intact for all these songs. He doesn't go so far away from these songs that you don't know what he's singing. But this one is probably one of the more radical reinterpretations, and I love it. This is really great the way this turned out.
I absolutely agree. I made another note. There is another little acoustic guitar feature in this song, which is crazy to have two of those back to back after just saying that doesn't really happen much. And then I noticed, again, we're going to turn it into a drinking game or something. Take a shot every time we mention Here at the Mayflower. At the end, the staccato strings reminded me of Talk to Me from Here at the Mayflower. That was the immediate response my brain gave, like, oh, that sounds like maybe he drew some influence from that into this, because it would make sense that around this time maybe he was starting to write the material from Here at the Mayflower, because this came out at the end of 96. The Mayflower came out in 2001. So that's a logical timeline to say maybe he really was pulling some of the ideas that he conceptualized here, but then really perfected coming about 4 or 5 years later. So that was all I had for that song. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover for that?
Yeah, and I think the only other thing was to mention that I love the turnaround after the chorus. I think that was one of the biggest elements of this arrangement that you really don't hear so much in the original version. I absolutely love the use of the chords that were chosen. This was a great arrangement.
It seriously was. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if I've ever seen video of this being performed, like on Manilow TV or something. For those of you who don't know, Manilow TV is a subscription thing online. It's kind of like Manilow YouTube. Every month they put up more than a dozen different concerts. Highly recommend you check that out, because Barry and I both have it, and we've started having like watch parties for the concerts and everything. But I don't think I've ever seen The Air That I Breathe performed on Manilow TV. So I'm interested to know, was it performed at all? So again, if you saw The Air That I Breathe performed live and you're watching us right now, email us, text us, do whatever, because we would like to know. Because I've never seen. Same with When I Need You. I've never seen it performed on any video. I'd be interested.
Well, he did do a brief snippet of it on the Rosie O'Donnell show, but he did not play the whole thing for When I Need You. And as for The Air That I Breathe, or all of the Summer of 78 songs, one of the segments in the Clicker Tour, the Reminiscing Tour, is they actually did a wheel of Summer of 78 songs. So that would be interesting to hear from people out there who could tell us if there were other songs that wheel landed on.
Speaking of songs the wheel landed on, let's go into the next track, because I know I've seen the wheel land on this one at least once or twice. Bluer Than Blue. I've got my cheat sheet here because I can't read my handwriting. Randy Goodrun wrote the song, and Michael Johnson, I had to make sure I didn't say Michael Jackson, Michael Johnson performed this song in the 70s. This is a beauty of a song, and the biggest note that I have is, out of all of the songs on the record, on this record particularly, this feels like the song that could best fit into the Manilow discography on its own, without the concept of the Summer of 78, because we know Clive Davis back in the day would bring in outside songs for Manilow to put on his albums, and Manilow a 5 with the key changes and the arrangements. And even though there's no key change, I still feel like this song could do well on another album without this concept. And this is probably the strongest I feel about one of these songs, that it could survive on its own somewhere else in the discography. What are your thoughts, Barry?
I absolutely agree with that. And I have heard Manilow say that his intention with this album was to take songs that maybe weren't strongly identified with a particular person, but were sort of well known, that maybe he could be personally identified with the songs that he chose for this record. And I agree. Bluer Than Blue would really fit well, like maybe on a compilation of his entire career, it would fit very well and would be very nice alongside everything else.
I totally agree. And it's important to mention that we're talking about how this could fit in somewhere else in the discography. This is actually one of the arrangements on this particular record that he didn't change very much from the original.
Yeah, you're right. You know, it's funny because I've been in the grocery store and I've heard this song on, and I have to stop and listen very closely and figure out, is this the Barry version or is this the original Michael Johnson version? And sometime, most of the time, it's usually the Michael Johnson version. But I seem to remember at a time not long after the album came out in the grocery store, I really think it was the Manilow version. But of course, it's always very quiet and the store is very loud, so I could only get so much information. But I know Manilow's voice. When I hear his voice, I know it, and I can say with all conviction that's Barry Manilow playing right now.
I have the same thing. It's a gift and a curse, you know. So yeah, that was my biggest thing. Was this song feels like it could survive on its own in the Manilow discography somewhere else. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time for the day. If you haven't recognized at this point, Barry and I love to talk about this music, so there are still a lot of songs that we have yet to talk about on this album. That's going to be coming this coming Wednesday. It's going to be from the same conversation. We still have the same train of thought. We just chopped it in the middle so you don't have to watch hours of footage in one sitting. So real quick before we go, I want to make a brief plug for the Manilow Music Project. That is Dr. Barry Manilow's nonprofit organization that donates funds, equipment, instruments, you name it, to schools in need with music programs in need. You can donate and learn more about them over at manilowmusicproject.org and on social media at Manilow Music Project. They're a great project with a great mission. We highly recommend you check out the work that they do. Right now, our theme music that we're using on the Manilow Method is based on Frédéric Chopin's Prelude in C minor. It's performed by my co-host, Barry Harris, and for those of you Fanilows out there in the audience, you'll know that Dr. Manilow's song Could It Be Magic is based off that same Prelude in C minor. So before we go, we just want to say thank you to Barry Manilow and his band and his crew and everyone that has helped him achieve success along the way, and we hope that you will tune into part 2 of our album discussion here in a couple of days. We'll see you soon, everybody.